Friends and fellow travelers, a very, very warm welcome to Anita Dube. Anita, to begin with the beginning, how did it all start? How did you come to art? How did art come to you?
Hans, it's a very long story in my case. I arrived actually to say I started making art when I was almost 30. But I would like to tell you how it kind of all, it's a long. The beginning was to actually wanting to leave Lucknow, which is a small provincial town, and knowing that this is not enough for me. I want a bigger world, and actually leaving it to study history in Delhi University. And during that time, not really knowing, studying history, but not really enjoying it, and knowing that this is also not what I want to do. So it's also a lot of wanderings in the city, looking at art, attending poetry sessions and things like that, being very confused and wandering. And I want to say that because these things are important in my practice. Wandering, and in that sense, in a state of not knowing and encountering certain things and then knowing something is important. So that's what happened. And then I knew at the end of that I was interested in two things, art and poetry, and I thought I would apply to two places, MS University Baroda for art criticism and Central University Hyderabad to study comparative literature. And I'm saying this because this is also important, because I got an invitation or call letter to MS University Baroda to give an interview in the art history department. I went to that place, I liked that place. It was a difficult decision, and I think here a teacher like Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh is important, because even though I had no background in art before, I had done a BA in history and this was a master's course in art criticism. We started talking about poetry. He said, "What are you reading?" I said, "I'm reading Ami Césaire, I'm reading some of the poets." And actually he said, "Oh, I'm reading those same poets." So we had a lovely conversation, and he saw it fit to admit me in the art history course. And I think everything now is history, because he's really important in that sense as a teacher, having sensed the fact that I could do something with culture. But what is important for me is that I didn't even go to Central University Hyderabad to give an interview, because I liked the place, and here chance plays a role, because I applied to two places without knowing really what I wanted to do. The first one gave me a wonderful atmosphere and an opportunity, and I stuck with it. And this is quite important in the way I work also, because it's not about deliberation so much. It's about trusting in something that you encounter, you are comfortable with. It leads you somewhere, and you say that you trust this, and you then work on it, of course. But so this again chance that I studied art history, and then later on after many years writing some texts and things like that, touching some material and realizing that perhaps this is more comfortable for me. Words are there, and the shaping of words is more anxiety ridden, and that the shaping of material was perhaps not so anxiety ridden. And I thought, if I have a comfortable relationship with that, I should explore the possibility of making art. And as I've been saying to you, I almost made my first pieces at around the age of 29, 30.
Thank
so
you
it's
so
long
much.
journey.
It's a flânerie of some wonderful sort. And I mean, one of the things which is interesting, that in this flânerie, I think also that you took this time to do that. I think it's something we discussed actually in a conference last week.
Yes.
Is that now there is this whole pressure on students to immediately produce.
Yes.
It was the same for me. I did nothing for 6 years until I did my first exhibition. I was just on an infinite flânerie.
Right.
And on your long flânerie, writing played a big role before you became a practicing artist. And I've read your writings on the sculptor Krishna Kumar, and also on the genesis and fall of the Indian Radical Painters and Sculptors Association. And we haven't spoken about that yet today in terms of the protest against forgetting and memory. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about your writing, about these texts in particular, and also your positioning within this frame of history.
I was trained in art history, and what was interesting is that while I was studying art history, all my friends were painters and sculptors. So I would actually hang out with them, and actually hours spent in studios discussing things, absorbing practices, how people did things. And coming back to your question, that these texts, of course, came about out of the process of my life. You know, I was studying, I got involved with some people, there was love, there was all these other things, exhibitions were planned, and since I was a writer, it actually came to me to write these texts on, so to say, they were my friends, and they were my friends and colleagues, and also to try to, perhaps they are not very deeply theoretical texts, but I guess because of that intimacy of knowing the people, they have a certain, let's say, a reading about the people and the work, which I still am fond of. I mean, I still, I'm close, and I'm connected to those texts.
Now, we spoke about epiphanies earlier on, and in science one can very often say, for example, Benoit Mandelbrot told me about the day he saw the fractal suddenly on a blackboard, and that changed his life. And I read many interviews you gave, and there is always this recurrent moment of 96 with Desert Queen, and that seems to have been something extraordinary in your practice, where many things started to change. It's also very interesting that it happened actually in Africa, when you were in Africa. So I wanted to ask you, I mean, you call it a chance kind of thing, but I wanted to ask you to tell us about that chance kind of thing, and to which extent maybe it's in a John Cage way, controlled chance also.
Well, there are stories, but we'll have to keep telling stories about all these things, because what I inherited from my contact with my friends and colleagues is a kind of a sculptural practice which was more traditional, carving wood. And so for many years, maybe about 5-6 years, I was carving pieces of wood, different kind of things. I tried to do my own things. There was something that, of course, I broke through from what I had seen and what my friends had been doing. But there was a sense that I had kind of acquired a certain skill, and I didn't know what else I wanted. So I actually was not working for almost a year in terms of as a sculptor. I didn't know, I was confused. I thought I have to stop this. And the last thing I think I did is, which was not shown, is a very large carved, huge like bull-like figure, which is a very, my kind of reading on fascism and things like that. It's a very muscular, but it's a very foreshortened. It's still lying in my house, in the compound of the apartment that I stayed with. But it was such a huge exercise that at the end of it, I was tired, and I thought, I have to stop this. There's something not okay about the way I'm continuing. And in that confusion, when I left for Africa, I just actually carried these materials. They were beginning to attract me already. Velvet as a kind of a skin, its certain thickness, its qualities of absorbing light, it being something warm, as a fabric that had body. These things are very important for me, so I carried this fabric with me. And as I've said, it was fairly a chance kind of thing. I didn't start out making the work immediately with this material, but somehow being forced to be indoors pushed me to that, and I guess certain things, when you take a leap, it happens in this space which you can't control. But once you've taken the leap, of course, you shape things, and you direct something somewhere. And once that beginning was made, you've already touched something that you have to explore further. And there are so many works that I've done, and this thing stays with me. This attraction towards a second skin on objects, on things which would, as I've said somewhere, which would take that object away from its earlier history into another history, or into another life, a cultural life, or something like that.
We spoke earlier with Bharti about this idea of the found object, no, and that it's not necessarily in a sort of a 80s way an appropriation or a ready-made revisited, but it's more a metamorphosis. And I was wondering, in terms of your work, the connection to the found object somehow. I wanted to ask you to tell us about the interface between the found object and textuality, and somehow also the relation to performance, no? If I think about the performance you did at KHOJ.
Right. Again, it's long. I have to reach this answer in a longer fashion. Regarding the found object, since I did so much carving and things like that and making, for me the found was a very liberatory moment, and it came about in two things, and I think that's such an interesting thing that we did at Aisha with Puja Sood, an early exhibition on Artaud. Anton and Artaud, we were trying to, it was his centenary or something like that, we were trying to honor it, and I did two small pieces in that show. One was installing these ceramic enameled eyes in the corner of in the gallery, in an architectural space where three planes meet and you get a corner. So actually the architecture becomes sculpture in that sense. And also for me it was very interesting that the architecture becomes sculpture, but also you are sexualizing architecture, which is a fairly neutral, it doesn't have to have, architecture never has sex, in it. But here was actually, by installing those eyes in that corner, I was actually sexualizing architecture and actually pointing out to a fact that, using a found space to make this work. And in that same exhibition was two small pieces which I had begun to make out of bones, and there's a long story, and a lot of friends here are very familiar with that story, is because my father was diagnosed with cancer and all of that, and when I visited home in the afternoon, I asked my mother, where is that sack of bones that my brother was studying with, and it was that conjunction of that moment that I had these things in my studio. I had begun to make, but that particular exhibition is very telling, because two very different things in my work, and both are found objects, the bone as well as the enameled eyes, which I use from time to time, and both these pieces were present in that exhibition.
Yeah, it's interesting because with Patti we spoke about this idea of recurrent elements in the work, and Raymond called them personified abstraction. And when I read about your eyes, and also when we visited your studio, you told me that the eyes kept popping up again and again over more than a decade. I was wondering if that was for you a personified abstraction?
Absolutely, totally.
Yeah.
And I have a very clear story about that. One of my very close friends, she used one eye in one of her works, and when I saw it, I was so struck, it kind of resonated so much with me that I had to explore where you get these things from, what is the thing. And she had probably used an eye which was 2 inches, like a big one, because they're available from sizes that are 1 millimeter, very small, 1 mm something, to maybe 4 or 5 inches. So I began to explore that material, and I found out that they were actually manufactured in a small town of Nathdwara, which is a religious town in Rajasthan. And I had to go there and actually, buy all these things, and so many stories connected with all these things, because when you go to that small town, you think that it is there would be an industry of some kind, but it's shocking. It's small cottage industries, small families, the husband, the wife, 2 children in a small hut with one little chula, actually manufacturing all these God's eyes. And there are several such little households from where these things actually come from. So all these things so interesting actually, when you work with something, when you explore these other things that are connected to that sociology and the manufacture of it.
And now within your practice, which has so many realized works over the last decades, I was wondering about your unbuilt roads, projects which have been too big to be realized. Maybe also there can be projects which are too small to be realized. I mean, Ciro Meireles once told me he wanted to do this tiny little cube in a gigantic exhibition space, and nobody just never accepted it because the museums were scared that there would be no visitors, and there would just be this. So project was too small to be realized. So I was wondering if you have projects too big to be realized, too small to be realized, sensor projects. What are your unbuilt roads?
I don't know about, but I have several things which are not realized, but I will talk about a couple of them. And there's also one which I think a lot of my friends are familiar with, because I've not only I've imagined it, and since I realized that I could not do it, I've offered it as something that other people could realize.
Wow, so you gave it to others?
Yes, and that is about having a kind of a bar which is a pedagogic space. And it's my reading that in India, with the kind of repression that we have, young people are not able to study in atmospheres which are which have eros flowing through it, which has education, which has how do you learn? Because I think I have suffered all these things, so I always wanted to set up a space, calling it a kind of a total bar. Means a bar means a cafe which has books, a library, a video screen, a music equipment, everything, and people come and information and everything flows through it. For example, there's a visiting filmmaker in the city and he wants to show his film. This is the place to go to because it's instantaneous programming. And I've always imagined, and I've offered this idea to many people whom I think can do it, but it hasn't happened. So I don't know, this is one of the things.
And did some of your friends realize it, or
no, it hasn't happened till now. At least
nobody did.
No, I don't know. Well, other projects, larger projects, because I've been using, as you know, I've been working with words since the last so many years. And you were talking about performance, and I cut those words out of meat in KHOJ during a performance. And then thinking about the words and many things, and there are many projects connected to that. One is specifically about actually altering the landscape of a city, and especially this project came to my mind when I was traveling from Charles de Gaulle Airport into Paris, and you drive down and you see Siemens, Nokia, the whole skyline, and I thought I want to replace in the same format, but with words like love, like epiphany, many things that we actually need to think about, and maybe and also to think that people, when they're driving down the city, they're used to seeing Nokia, Siemens, but then you don't see that. You see in that same format, you see love, and you see compassion, or you see many other things using the same format, and this is one of the projects that I want to do on that big scale, not realized, of course.
Now, in the kind of literature on your work and in your interviews, I found this idea of the political imperative, sort of notion of a political imperative in your work, and I was wondering also about the relation to that, the connection to feminism, because we heard earlier today many different positions regarding this. We heard Nivedita Menon and Sheva Chachi, and I was wondering, because I read here that you didn't have, as opposed to them, anything to do directly with feminism and also with the women's movement. However, you say that you deal with it somehow every day in your living and in your working. So I was wondering if you could talk about to which extent your idea of feminism is maybe different from what we heard earlier today.
When I started out, as I was saying, that I immediately during my college days, I got involved with this Indian Radical Painters and Sculptors Association, which was a kind of a fairly extreme left kind of position within culture, and so my politicization has been more through a kind of Marxism, but actually a collective in which there were about 10 men and I was one of the women only. But so my life going through this whole process of that left movement, and fighting my way through as an individual, as a woman, as somebody who was writing and then wanting to make art and things like that, is actually taken me on a course where feminism was not outside; it was a necessity.
Yeah.
That you had to use it not only to survive, but actually to become who you want to become. So it's actually a tool, and via that tool, I guess theory always comes to me via life. So through the processes of life, and it's always interesting actually, because you have something very specific in those cases. So when I make blood wedding, it's actually very specific. I'm referring to very specific experiences, specific things, and therefore you can construct something like that. It's not so much about theory. It's actually being really, again, really flowing through, flowing through the shape of the bone, and to take it where I want to take it, and many such things.
Now, in terms of these very specific experiences, and also obviously your connection to poetry, which you mentioned last time we met, that all leads us to Rainer Maria Rilke and his question. I'd like to end with this last question. Rainer Maria Rilke's advice to a young poet. What would be in 2011 your advice to a young artist?
That's always difficult. That it's actually not really so much about art as it is about life and freedom, and I would imagine that it is always trying for that actually. So when you shift practices, when you're restless, when you're trying to experiment, and when you're in a laboratory constantly, it means that it is not so much about art. It's more about life, and it's more about freedom.
Great. Anita Dube, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.